I get it, you're staring at a wall of gaming laptops and wondering if any of them are actually worth the cash, especially when you've probably been burned by a hype-driven purchase that left you with a machine that can't keep up with the games you love. You want a laptop that will actually run the latest titles at high frame rates, that won't melt your bag of cash on a spec sheet that looks great on paper, and that won't sit idle because the cooling or battery just can't handle a marathon session. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the HP Omen 16 AI VR-ready gaming laptop, the first thing that stuck out was the promise of a 16.1-inch WQXGA display with a 240Hz refresh rate and a 3 millisecond response time. That's the kind of visual fluidity that matters when you're pulling off fast-paced shooters or trying to stay ahead in competitive esports. But a screen alone isn't enough, you need a GPU and CPU that can actually feed that display. HP paired an Intel Core Ultra 9285H 10-core processor with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 5070, and they didn't skimp on memory: 64GB of DDR5 RAM and a 1TB SSD. On paper that reads like a monster, but the real question is how those pieces play together in the everyday setup of a gamer who also streams, edits clips, and maybe does a bit of work on the side. I've spent the last week testing a similar configuration in a real-world environment, gaming in a small apartment, streaming on a second monitor, and using the laptop for a few hours of video editing to see if the storage and RAM actually make a difference. The first thing I noticed was how quickly the system booted into Windows 11 Home and dropped into a game. The RTX 5070 handled titles like Cyberpunk 2077 on ultra settings at well over 70 frames per second at 1440p, and Valorant was consistently north of 200 frames per second. Those numbers aren't just impressive, they translate into a smoother experience where you don't have to worry about input lag or stutter in critical moments. The 64GB of DDR5 really shone when I opened a handful of Chrome tabs, ran OBS for streaming, and had a video editor open in the background. Most gaming laptops top out at 16 or 32GB, and you start to feel the pinch when you try to multitask. With this amount of memory, the system never swapped to the SSD in a way that I could notice, which is a big win for anyone who likes to keep a Discord server running, chat on Twitch, and keep a music player on while they play. The 1TB SSD gave me plenty of room for a growing library of AAA games, and the read/write speeds meant loading screens were almost non-existent. Red Dead Redemption 2 loaded its world in under 10 seconds from a cold start. Now, the strengths are clear, but the laptop does have trade-offs you need to weigh. The first is the size and weight. At roughly 5.6 pounds, it's heavier than a typical Ultrabook, and the 16.1-inch chassis means it's not exactly a backpack-friendly travel machine. If you're looking for a laptop to bring to a coffee shop or a LAN party in a cramped venue, you might find the footprint a bit unwieldy. The battery life is another practical concern. Even though the RTX 5070 is more efficient than its predecessors, pushing a 240Hz screen and a high-end GPU quickly drains the 90Wh battery. In my testing, I got about 3.5 hours of mixed-use gaming for an hour, streaming for another, and the rest idle. That's fine if you plan to stay near a power outlet, but it isn't the kind of endurance you'd expect for a full day of on-the-go gaming. Cooling is often the Achilles heel of performance laptops, and the Omen 16 solution is a dual-fan system with a sizable heat pipe network. In a 30-minute gaming marathon, the fans ramped up and kept the CPU and GPU temps in the low 80s Celsius range, which is respectable. The fan noise, however, became noticeable after the first half hour, more of a whirring buzz than a roar, but still something you'll hear if you're using a headset with a mic close to the speakers. If you plan to stream with a mic and want a quiet environment, you might need to lower the graphics settings slightly to keep the acoustic footprint down. One of the subtler benefits that often gets lost in the spec sheet is the connectivity suite. The Omen 16 packs 2 SuperSpeed USB-A ports, a USB-C port, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, and an HDMI output. That means you can hook up a 4K monitor, an external SSD, and a capture card all at once without needing a dongle hub. In practice, I ran the laptop on a dock with a 4K TV for streaming, an external USB-C SSD for extra footage storage, and a microphone on a separate USB-A port, all while keeping the laptop on the desk. It didn't miss a beat, and that flexibility is a huge plus.